This is my true story. I gave my whole life to my only son. I worked under the sun, through hunger and sickness, just so he could study, eat well, and live in comfort. I thought when I got old, he would take care of me, like I once took care of him. But I was wrong. One night, he told me to get out of my own house. He called me useless. His wife laughed. I slept on the street that night, in the rain. But life had other plans for me. Before I tell you, comment where you're from and subscribe so others hear my story. It happened without warning. One evening, my son stood in front of me with cold, empty eyes. He looked like a stranger wearing my son's face. He said it simply, like he was asking me to pass the salt. "You need to leave." "This is my house now," I thought. I misheard him. I looked around at the walls I had built with my bare hands, the roof I had paid for with years of sweat and pain. Every corner of that house carried a piece of my life, a piece of my love. But in his eyes I saw no love, no respect, not even a flicker of guilt. He had already decided. I was no longer welcome. I tried to remind him that I was his father, that this was my home, that everything he had came from my sacrifices. He didn't care. He looked past me, like I was some burden standing between him and his comfort. His wife stood behind him with a smile that cut deeper than any knife. She didn't have to say a word. Her silence told me everything. She had poisoned his heart long ago, feeding him pride and greed until there was no room left for me. I felt my chest tighten. I remembered the night I signed the house papers in his name. I thought I was giving him security. I thought I was protecting his future. I didn't know I was signing away my dignity. My hands shook, not from fear, but from heartbreak. I wanted to shout, to remind him of every sacrifice, every night I went hungry so he could eat, every time I took the blame to protect him. But the words died in my throat. His face was stone, cold, lifeless. He pointed toward the door. Just one finger, but that gesture broke me more than any words could. "Leave," he said again. And that was it. My own son, my blood, throwing me out of the house I built. I looked down at my feet. The floor beneath me seemed to spin. The house that once felt warm and full of laughter now felt like a prison I didn't belong in. I turned to walk away, but I stopped at the door for one last look. The pictures on the wall, my wedding photo, his childhood smile, stared back at me like ghosts. Memories I couldn't touch anymore. I wanted to take them, but they weren't mine now. Nothing in that house was mine anymore, not even the air. He stood there with his arms crossed, waiting for me to leave, like I was some unwanted guest who had overstayed his welcome. His wife leaned on the wall, smirking. I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. She wanted me gone. She had won. And my son, the boy I carried on my shoulders, the boy who used to hold my hand, he was on her side. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't curse him. I just walked out. My feet felt heavy, but my heart felt heavier. Outside, the night was cold. The wind hit my face like punishment. I didn't know where to go. My pockets were empty. My soul was empty, and the world suddenly felt bigger than it ever had. I looked back one last time, hoping maybe he'd call me back. But the door closed behind me. The sound of it echoed through my chest, like a final nail in a coffin. That night, I sat on the pavement outside my own gate. I could see the lights still on in the house. I imagined him sitting at my table, eating dinner, laughing, maybe feeling proud. I wondered if he even thought of me, sitting outside like a beggar. The same man who raised him now treated like dirt. My eyes filled with tears, but I didn't cry out loud. I just stared at the house until my vision blurred. Every sound hurt. The laughter from inside, the crickets in the dark, the passing cars that didn't stop. My stomach growled, but hunger was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. I thought about sleeping there by the gate, but I knew I couldn't. I didn't belong there anymore. My son had made that clear. I walked down the road, not knowing where I was going. My legs moved on their own. The streetlights flickered above me, each one lighting up just enough for me to take another step. I passed houses with open windows, families talking, children laughing. It felt like another world, one I was no longer part of. By midnight, I found an empty bench near the park. I sat down, clutching my small bag. Just some clothes, old papers, and a picture of my late wife. I looked at her face and whispered, "He threw me out." The wind blew softly, like she was answering me from somewhere far away. I wanted to believe she was watching, that she saw what happened, that she still believed in me, even if no one else did. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat there under the streetlight, staring at nothing. My life had changed in one evening. My home, my son, my pride, gone. And as the cold crept into my bones, I realized something cruel and clear. Sometimes, the people you give everything to are the first to destroy you. I didn't fight back. I didn't scream or curse. I just packed a small bag, a shirt, a few papers, a picture of my wife, and walked out. My hands trembled as I folded the same clothes I used to wear when I dropped my son off at school. Each item I packed felt like a piece of my life slipping away. My son stood by the door, watching. He didn't offer to help. He didn't even look sad. His wife stood beside him, her arms crossed, whispering something into his ear. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew she was saying, "It's better this way." That phrase would haunt me for years. I stepped outside, and the night air hit me like a slap. It was cold, sharp, and cruel. The house behind me glowed warm with light, the light I had paid for. I stood there for a moment, waiting for him to call out, to say he didn't mean it. But he didn't. The door closed. The sound echoed in my head like a gunshot. I had nowhere to go. No family, no money, no home. I had raised a son who now looked at me like garbage. That night, I walked the streets with no destination. My feet hurt, but I didn't care. The roads were empty, silent, except for the hum of distant traffic. I passed people laughing inside restaurants, the smell of food drifting out, food I couldn't afford anymore. I thought of how I used to come home with groceries, how my son would jump into my arms when he was little. Now, he had pushed me out like I was nothing. I found a park bench and sat down. The sky above was dark, no stars, just clouds. I leaned back and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. My heart wouldn't let me rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that cold, empty look. I replayed it again and again, trying to understand what I did wrong. Maybe I loved him too much. Maybe I made life too easy for him. Maybe I should have let him struggle a little, learn pain, learn respect. But I wanted him to have everything I never did. I gave him too much, and in return, he gave me nothing. Morning came slowly. My body ached from the cold. My clothes were damp with dew. People walked past me, avoiding eye contact. No one cared about an old man on a bench. I looked around and realized I had become invisible. I was no longer a father, no longer a man with a home, just another forgotten face in the crowd. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak. I hadn't eaten since yesterday. I walked to a nearby shop and asked for some bread, but the shopkeeper frowned and waved me away. I wasn't his problem. That day, I went to the only place I could think of, the temple. I sat outside for hours, just staring at the steps. I didn't pray, I didn't have words left. My mouth was dry, my eyes burned, and my chest felt heavy. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. I thought maybe if I just disappeared, no one would notice. The world would go on. My son would live his life, maybe even forget I ever existed. That thought hurt, but I couldn't stop it. At night, I found another bench, this time near the bus station. The noise helped me feel less alone. People came and went, bags in hand, faces full of purpose. I had nowhere to go. The buses came and left, but none were for me. I sat there, watching, until the lights dimmed and the air grew colder again. My stomach hurt from hunger. I pressed my hand against it, trying to quiet the pain. A few days passed like that. I tried calling my son, but his number was blocked. The message said, "User unavailable." I went back to the house once, stood by the gate, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. But when I knocked, the maid opened the door and told me never to come back. "Madam said you're not allowed here," she said. Madam. Not my daughter-in-law. Not family. Madam. I nodded and walked away. By the end of the week, I was staying at a small shelter. The walls smelled like dampness and sweat. The beds were hard, but at least it was something. I watched the other old men there, some drunk, some broken like me. They talked about their children too, sons who had taken everything and left them behind. I realized I wasn't alone. There were many fathers like me, forgotten and thrown aside like old furniture. But knowing that didn't make it easier. Each night, I lay awake thinking about my son's face, his voice, his laughter when he was a child. How did that little boy become this cruel man? I had no answer. Maybe life had twisted him. Maybe greed had taken over. Maybe I had simply failed as a father. The pain of that thought was worse than hunger, worse than cold. One night, as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I whispered to myself, "You fell, old man. You fell hard. But maybe one day, you'll stand again." It was a weak promise, but it was all I had left. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. I wandered from one shelter to another, carrying my small bag and my shame wherever I went. Sometimes I slept under bridges, sometimes outside closed shops, sometimes in parks if the police didn't chase me away. Hunger became my closest companion. Some days I would go without food at all. I learned to drink water slowly to quiet my stomach. I learned to smile at strangers who looked down on me because anger only made the nights longer. My clothes grew dirty, my hair turned white, and my body grew weak. But the pain inside me was stronger than hunger or cold. It was the pain of being forgotten by my own blood. The same son I once called my pride now acted like I was dead. He never answered my calls. He blocked my number. I even tried to reach him through relatives, but they said he told everyone I had gone senile, that I was crazy, that I had lost my mind. Those words cut deeper than knives. It wasn't enough for him to throw me out. He had to erase me completely. I was now a ghost in his life, a stain he wanted to scrub away. I would see him sometimes in the newspaper or on the news, standing next to rich people, smiling, talking about his growing business. Each time, I stared at his face and wondered how the same man who had once clung to my leg as a boy could become someone who looked at me like I was nothing. People around me avoided my story. They didn't want to hear about betrayal. They preferred to believe that children are kind, that family means love. When I told them my son threw me out, they looked away or changed the subject. It was easier for them to pretend I was lying, but I didn't lie. Every scar, every wrinkle on my face carried the truth. I had given him everything I had. My land, my savings, my youth, all gone so he could stand tall. And now, I was crawling through the same streets I once walked with pride. There were nights when the loneliness was worse than hunger. I would sit on the curb, watching families walk by, fathers holding their sons' hands, laughing, talking, living simple lives. I envied them, not their money, not their clothes, just their warmth. The kind of warmth I once had before my home turned into a stranger's house. Sometimes I would talk to myself, whispering my wife's name into the air, hoping maybe she could hear me from wherever she was. She would have known what to say. She always did. But now it was just me, an old man with no one left to listen. I tried to find work, but no one wanted to hire someone my age. They said I was too weak, too slow. I went to construction sites, shops, even factories. Each time, I was turned away. The younger men laughed sometimes, saying, "Old man, go home." They didn't know I had no home to go to. I swallowed my pride because pride doesn't feed you. I started picking up bottles and cans, selling them for a few coins. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy bread. Every piece of bread felt like a victory, not over the world, but over the hunger that tried to destroy me. One evening, I saw my son driving by in a shiny car. He didn't see me. I stood there, hidden behind a tree, watching him pass. His wife sat beside him, laughing. They looked happy, full of life. I wanted to run up to him, to knock on his window and say, "It's me, your father." But I didn't. I just watched until the car disappeared. My heart felt heavy, but my feet stayed still. I realized then that I wasn't part of his world anymore. He had erased me completely, and maybe I had to accept that. There were nights when I wanted to give up, to just close my eyes and never wake again. But every time that thought came, something stopped me. Maybe it was my wife's memory. Maybe it was the small hope that life could still change. One night, a man at the shelter said something that stayed with me. He said, "Old man, we suffer so long that one day suffering gets tired of us." I didn't understand it then, but I held on to those words. Maybe one day my pain would get tired too. So I kept walking. I cleaned myself up as best I could, looked for odd jobs, carried boxes, swept floors, did whatever people would pay me for. The money was little, but it was honest. Slowly, I began to save small coins in a tin box. Every coin was a reminder that I could still stand, even if the world had pushed me down. Each night, when I lay my head down, I told myself the same thing. He took everything, but he didn't take your will. That thought became my light in the darkness. I didn't know where my path would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. I would not die broken. I would not let my story end there. I remembered everything, every small moment, every decision, every sacrifice that led me to that cold bench, that empty stomach, that silence. I remembered the day my son was born, how small his hands were, how his first cry made me cry too. I promised myself I would protect him no matter what. I worked in the fields until my hands cracked and bled. I carried bricks, lifted heavy sacks, worked in rain and heat, just so he could have milk, shoes, and books. I didn't care about myself. I only cared that he had a better life. I used to tell people, "My son will be great one day." And he was. He became everything I dreamed for him to be. But in the process, I became nothing. I remembered the time he got into trouble at school, how I ran for hours to meet the teacher, begging them not to expel him. I took the blame for everything. I sold our only cow to pay for his college fees. When he wanted to start a business, I sold my land, the same land my father left for me, just to give him the chance to succeed. I trusted him completely. I believed blood could never turn cold. When he bought the house, I told him to put it in his name. I thought I was giving him responsibility, but I was giving him power. Power he would one day use against me. I remembered his wedding day. He looked happy, nervous, proud. I smiled the whole day, even when I saw the arrogance in his new wife's eyes. I ignored it because I wanted him to be happy. I thought her sharp tongue and cold manners would soften with time. But I was wrong. She changed everything. She whispered in his ear, made him see me as a burden, not a blessing. She called me old man instead of father. I would hear them laugh behind closed doors, whispering things they thought I couldn't hear. They said I was useless, that I should live in an old age home. My own house had turned into a place where my footsteps were unwelcome, and yet I stayed quiet. I cooked for them, cleaned for them, watered the plants, even watched over their child when he was born. My grandson, my light. He smiled at me, and for a moment, I felt life again. But even that was taken away. His mother didn't want me near him. She said I smelled like poverty. She said I would spoil him with old ideas. My son stayed silent. That silence hurt more than any words. I remembered the night before he threw me out. I had cooked his favorite meal. I waited for him to come home so we could eat together like we used to. He came in late, drunk, angry. He didn't even look at me. I tried to talk, but he pushed the plate away. His wife laughed. I asked what was wrong, and he shouted at me, said I was useless, said he was tired of taking care of me. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the wall, wondering when love had turned into hate. I didn't sleep. My heart told me something bad was coming. And the next day, he told me to leave. Just like that. No explanation, no regret. Sometimes, when I lay awake in the shelter, I would close my eyes and remember those moments like a movie that wouldn't stop playing. Every kind act, every sacrifice, every word, all of it twisted into pain. The memory of how I gave him everything became the weight I carried every single day. I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't. A father's heart doesn't know how to stop loving, even when it's broken. I remembered my wife's face before she died. She held my hand and said, "Promise me you'll take care of our son." I did. I kept that promise, even when it destroyed me. I wished she could see what he had become. Maybe if she had been there, things would have been different. She would have seen the poison growing inside him and stopped it. But I was alone, blind with love, thinking I was doing the right thing. Every memory felt like a knife, not because of what I lost, but because of how much I gave. I used to think memories were treasures, but now they were punishments, constant reminders of the man I used to be and the family that used to exist. I couldn't escape them. They followed me wherever I went. In the sound of laughter, I heard his voice. In the smell of food, I remembered cooking for him. In the sight of fathers walking with sons, I saw everything I had lost. Still, I held on to those memories, even when they hurt, because they were the only thing I had left of my old life. They reminded me that I once loved, once gave, once mattered. And even if my son had forgotten who I was, I refused to forget who I had been. I refused to die bitter. I refused to let the streets be my grave. I had already lost my home, my family, and my pride, but something inside me kept whispering, "You are not finished yet." Maybe it was the voice of my wife. Maybe it was the last piece of strength that life hadn't stolen from me. One morning, after another sleepless night at the shelter, I stood up, washed my face with cold water from a broken tap, and told myself, "Get up, old man. You've fallen far enough." My legs shook, but I walked anyway. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't keep living like a ghost. That day, I went to the old industrial area on the edge of the city. The place smelled of rust and dust, but it reminded me of my younger days when I worked with machines and sweat instead of tears. I saw a small factory with a faded sign and broken gate. I went inside, hoping maybe someone needed a cleaner or a guard. The owner was an old friend from years ago, though I barely recognized him at first. He looked at me in shock. "Is that you?" he asked. I nodded. I didn't have to tell him my story. It was written on my face. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "I need someone to watch the place at night. It's not much, but it's something." That's how it began. I slept on a small cot in the corner of that dusty factory, surrounded by old machines and silence. It wasn't home, but it was shelter. I swept the floors, fixed the leaks, oiled the tools, and guarded the place like it was my own. I worked hard, not because I had to, but because it gave me purpose. For the first time in years, I felt like I mattered again. My friend paid me little, but I didn't care. I saved every penny. I ate simple food, rice, bread, water. I didn't need luxury. I needed peace. As weeks passed, I started repairing broken parts around the factory. I had learned a lot in my younger days, and my hands still remembered. One day, a machine that had been useless for years started running again because of my work. My friend smiled and said, "You still got it." That one line filled my heart with warmth I hadn't felt in years. Slowly, I started to rebuild not just the machines, but myself. I began saving small amounts of money. I bought a used radio, an old notebook, and a pen. Every night, I wrote a few lines about my day. I didn't write to anyone. I just wrote to remind myself I was still alive. I wrote about the stars I saw through the cracked roof, about the sound of the machines humming, about the peace that comes when no one expects anything from you. The silence that once haunted me now healed me. Months turned into years. The factory began to grow again. My friend gave me more responsibility, managing workers, checking deliveries, even handling small accounts. I learned to read balance sheets, understand numbers, and make small investments. Every rupee I earned, I saved carefully. I bought an old second-hand phone, started reading about businesses, savings, interest. I watched how money moved, how people failed, and how patience was the real power. I didn't want revenge. I wanted redemption. I didn't want to prove my son wrong. I wanted to prove to myself that I could still stand tall without him. The pain he gave me had burned everything soft inside me, but from those ashes, I built something stronger. Discipline. After a few years, I started my own small trading business. It was nothing big, just buying and selling old equipment, repairing, reselling. But I knew what I was doing. Slowly, I built trust, and with trust came growth. People respected me again, not because of my name, but because of my honesty. I never cheated anyone. I never lied. Every coin I earned was clean. The money started to grow. I moved out of the factory and rented a small room. It wasn't luxury, but it was mine. I cooked my own food, kept my space tidy, prayed every morning, and worked until night. The loneliness was still there, but it no longer hurt. It became my strength, a quiet reminder of how far I had come. There were moments when I thought of my son. I wondered if he ever thought of me. I wondered if he was happy, if he even remembered the man who built his world. But I didn't reach out. I didn't want pity. I wanted peace. And for the first time in 10 years, I had found it. By the time I turned 70, I had enough savings to buy my own small property, a warehouse, some land, and the factory that had once given me shelter. I renamed it after my wife. Every time I saw her name on that signboard, I felt like I had finally come home. I didn't rebuild my life to prove anyone wrong. I rebuilt it because I refused to let betrayal be the last chapter of my story. 10 years passed, a whole decade of quiet work, quiet meals, quiet nights. The kind of silence that once felt like punishment had turned into peace. I woke up early each morning, drank my tea in the same chipped cup, looked at the sunrise, and thanked life for not killing me when it had the chance. I was no longer the broken man who slept on benches. I was older, yes, but I was stronger. I owned my own company now. Small, simple, but mine. I had workers who respected me, not because of my age, but because they saw how I worked beside them. I didn't shout. I didn't command. I just did my job and paid them fairly. I didn't need power. I just needed dignity, something my own son had once stolen from me. In those 10 years, I learned the value of silence. I learned that sometimes not reacting is the greatest revenge. I never went near my old house again. I never asked about my son. The world had forgotten me, but I hadn't forgotten that night. I carried it quietly, like an invisible scar. It didn't hurt anymore, but I never let it fade either. I wanted to remember where I came from, so I would never become like him. People around me began to respect me. They called me sir or boss, not knowing that once I was a father thrown out like garbage. I would watch young men argue with their fathers, walk out of their homes in anger, and I would tell them, "Be careful what you break. Some things can never be fixed." They didn't understand then. I didn't blame them. I had once been blind too, blind with love. The years taught me patience. They taught me how little a person really needs to live. I no longer cared about big houses or expensive clothes. I wore the same old shirts, the same worn-out shoes. I didn't want comfort. I wanted peace of mind. Every coin I earned I used wisely. I helped a few poor families, donated quietly to shelters, the same kind that once gave me a bed. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because I knew what it felt like to be forgotten. Some nights, I still thought about my son. I wondered if he had children now, if he ever told them about me, or if he lied, saying I was dead. Maybe he thought it was easier that way. Sometimes, I would dream of him as a child again, running to me with open arms, calling me Papa. I'd wake up with tears on my face, not of pain, but of longing, the kind that never truly leaves you. I often sat by the factory gate in the evenings, watching the sunset. The workers would leave, laughing, tired, talking about dinner and family. I would sit there until the light faded and the crickets started to sing. That's when I felt most alive, in the quiet, with no one to answer to, no one to hurt me. I realized that peace doesn't come from people. It comes from letting go of them. The city around me had changed. New buildings rose where old ones had fallen. Roads were wider, brighter. I was invisible to most, just an old man walking slowly, holding a small notebook, counting his blessings. And I liked it that way. Fame and recognition didn't matter. I had already seen what pride does to a man. Pride had destroyed my son. I had no use for it. Sometimes people asked if I had any family. I just smiled and said, "Once." They didn't press further. Maybe they saw the heaviness in my eyes. Maybe they respected the silence of an old man who carried too much history. But I didn't hate my son anymore. Hate is poison, and I had already tasted enough of it. I didn't forgive him either. Forgiveness felt too light, too easy. I simply stopped carrying him in my heart. I left him to his choices, to his life, to his own shadows. Those 10 years turned me into someone I never thought I could be. Calm, patient, and self-sufficient. I learned to find joy in small things, the sound of rain on the roof, the smell of tea, the laughter of my workers. I didn't need anything else. The man I used to be, desperate, broken, humiliated, was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, sharper, and wiser. But no matter how far I came, one thing never left me: the memory of the night I was thrown out. It stayed with me like a scar you stop feeling but never forget. It reminded me of who I was, who I became, and what love can cost when given to the wrong heart. And then, one quiet evening, as I was closing the office, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was shaky, weak, trembling. "Dad, it's me." 10 years of silence broke in that single word. My heart stopped. My son had finally called. The phone rang at dusk, when the sun was dying behind the roofs and the factory lights were flickering on. I almost didn't answer it. Unknown number. I usually ignored those. But something inside me, some quiet pull, made me pick it up. I lifted the phone slowly and said, "Hello." For a few seconds, there was only silence, then a breath, shaky and soft, like someone holding back tears. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 10 long years said, "Dad, it's me." My hand froze. My chest tightened. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, gripping the phone, listening to the sound of the man who had once thrown me into the streets like trash. His voice was not the same. It wasn't proud. It wasn't sharp. It was trembling, cracked, full of fear. He said, "Dad, please don't hang up." I didn't. I just listened. He began talking fast, words stumbling over each other. He said his business had collapsed. He said debts had swallowed him whole. He said people were coming for him, banks were calling, lawyers were sending letters. He said he was ruined, that his wife had left, that his house was being taken. He said he had no one else to turn to. Then, in a voice smaller than I ever thought I'd hear from him, he said, "Please, I need your help. You're the only one who can save me." For a long time, I said nothing. I could hear him breathing on the other end, desperate, waiting. I closed my eyes and saw that night again, the door closing, the laughter, the words he used to crush me. My mind went back to the park bench, the hunger, the humiliation, the endless nights under open skies. The same mouth that called me useless was now calling me savior. Life had a strange way of turning the wheel. I finally spoke. My voice came out calm, quiet. "Where are you?" He gave me the address. It was the same house, the same place where he told me to leave 10 years ago. For a moment, I felt my knees weaken. The ground beneath me seemed to move. The ghosts of that house were waiting for me, and now I was being called back. I hung up without saying much else. I sat down in my chair, staring at the wall for a long time. My hands trembled, not from fear, from something deeper. I didn't know what I was feeling. Pity, anger, sadness, maybe all of them, tangled together. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing his voice again and again. "Please, I need your help." I thought about the last time I saw his face, cold, proud, merciless. And now, he was begging. The same son who said I didn't deserve a bed was now drowning, reaching for the same hand he once rejected. I turned to the small photo of my wife by my bedside and whispered, "Do I help him?" The photo didn't answer, but I imagined her voice, soft, kind, forgiving, telling me to do what was right, not what was easy. The next morning, I sat by the window and watched the sunrise. I thought about how strange life is. The same hands that once pushed you down come back asking to be lifted. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. I just felt tired, tired of pain, tired of memories. But I knew I had to see him, not for his sake, but for mine. Maybe it was time to close the circle. Before I left for work, I wrote a note to myself on the desk. Not all debts are paid with money. I didn't know why I wrote it, but it felt right. That day, I couldn't focus on anything. My workers noticed something was off. I didn't tell them. How could I? How could I explain that the ghost of my past had suddenly come back, asking for help? When evening came, I locked the office and stood by the factory gate, staring at the road. 10 years ago, I walked that same road as a broken man. Now I was walking back with a steady step. The world had changed, but the pain hadn't. I got in a taxi and told the driver the address. As we drove, my chest grew heavy. I looked out the window, watching the city lights blur past, wondering what I would see when I reached that house. Would he look the same? Would he meet my eyes? Would he even recognize the man I had become? I didn't know. All I knew was that the son who once destroyed me was now the one reaching out to be saved, and I was the only one who could decide whether to lift him up or let him drown in the life he built with his own cruelty. When the taxi stopped at the gate of that old house, I took a deep breath. The air smelled the same: old paint, wet soil, broken promises. The lights inside were dim. My son was waiting. I could see his shadow through the window, small and still. 10 years ago, he stood tall, proud, powerful. Now, he looked smaller, weaker, empty. I stepped out, my heart steady. The time for begging was over. The time for truth had come. I stood in front of that house, the same one that had thrown me out. The walls looked older, the paint was peeling, the windows dirty. It was strange how the place that once felt like a cage now looked like a ruin. Time had taken its revenge too. I walked up the same steps I once built with my own hands, my shoes echoing softly. The door opened before I could knock. My son stood there, 10 years older, 10 years smaller. His shoulders were bent, his hair graying at the edges, his eyes hollow. The pride that once burned in them was gone, replaced by something I never thought I'd see: shame. He looked at me as if afraid I might turn away. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Only silence. Heavy, thick, and full of everything we didn't say. He stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. I walked past him slowly, my eyes scanning the walls. The house was almost empty. The expensive furniture was gone, the rooms half dark. The pictures that once hung proudly were missing. Maybe sold, maybe destroyed. The air smelled of dust and failure. My feet stopped in the living room, the same spot where he had once told me to leave. I remembered the laughter, his wife's voice, the coldness in his tone. Now, all I heard was the sound of the ceiling fan and the quiet trembling of his breath. He spoke first. His voice was small, broken. "Dad, I know what I did. I know I can't take it back. But please, I'm drowning. I'll lose everything." His hands shook as he spoke. "They're taking the house, the cars, everything I worked for. I have nothing left. You're the only one who can save me." He tried to look into my eyes, but couldn't. He looked down, like a boy who'd been caught lying. I didn't move. I didn't rush to comfort him. I just looked around the house, letting the silence speak for me. Every corner carried memories of love, betrayal, loss. I felt none of the anger I expected, only a deep, heavy sadness, the kind that sits inside you like a stone. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. "You already lost everything 10 years ago." He looked up, confused. I continued. "The day you told me to leave, you didn't just lose a house or a father. You lost your soul. You lost the man who would have given his life for you. Everything after that was just noise." He tried to speak, but his words broke into sobs. He sank to his knees, crying, not the proud man he once was, but a scared child, broken and desperate. His tears hit the floor like the echoes of everything I had endured. I stood there, watching him cry, and for the first time in many years, I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel small. I felt still, like a mountain unmoved by the storm around it. I thought about how life had turned its wheel. The same hands that once threw me out were now reaching toward me. The same lips that once called me useless were now begging for mercy. I should have felt joy. I should have felt victory. But I didn't. There was no joy in revenge, only emptiness. He looked up and whispered, "Please, Dad, help me. I'll do anything." His voice cracked like glass. I saw his eyes, bloodshot, tired, haunted. Maybe he had finally learned what pain felt like. Maybe he had finally met the same darkness he once sent me into. But I didn't rush to forgive him. Forgiveness isn't something you hand out like coins. It has to be earned, lived, carried. And he hadn't carried his pain long enough. I walked to the table and placed my old leather bag on it. Slowly, I opened it, took out an envelope, and placed it before him. "Everything you asked for," I said quietly. His eyes widened, his hands trembling as he reached for it. He must have thought it was money, or a paper that would save him. I watched as he tore it open. Inside was the deed to the house, the very house he once threw me out of. He looked up, confused, his eyes darting between me and the paper. I said nothing yet. I wanted him to read it fully, to understand. His hands began to shake harder as his eyes moved across the page. His lips parted. He realized what it said. The house had been signed over. Not to him, not to me, but to a local charity that housed abandoned elders. His face turned pale. I finally spoke. My voice was steady, almost gentle. "Now no one owns what tore us apart." He stared at me, mouth open, words stuck in his throat. He tried to speak, but no sound came. He looked around the empty room, the same walls that once echoed with pride now closing in on him. I turned toward the door. My steps were slow, calm, final. Behind me, I heard him whisper, "Dad, please, don't go." But I didn't stop. The man who had walked out of this house 10 years ago had been broken. The man who was walking out now carried peace. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology. I had already won. Not by destroying him, but by surviving him. I placed the envelope on the table and stood there, watching him. He picked it up with trembling hands, thinking it was his rescue, his salvation, his way out. His fingers tore the seal with desperation, his eyes hungry for hope. But as he read the first few lines, I saw the color drain from his face. His lips began to tremble, and his hands shook so hard the paper almost slipped from his grasp. He looked at me, confusion and disbelief clouding his eyes. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice hollow, small, almost frightened. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at him, at the man who once laughed as I walked out of this same house with nothing. Inside that envelope was the deed to the house, signed, stamped, sealed, but not in his name. It was donated to charity. The very same house he had once thrown me out of was now going to be a home for abandoned old men. The kind of men like me. The ones left behind by their families, forgotten and discarded like trash. "Now," I said quietly, "no one owns what tore us apart." He stared at me, silent. His mouth opened, but no sound came. His eyes darted around the empty room, as if the walls could help him, as if the ghosts of his past could protect him now. The silence stretched between us, heavy, thick, suffocating. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock in the distance, each second falling like judgment. He dropped the paper onto the table and took a step toward me. "You can't do this," he said finally, his voice breaking. "You can't take this from me." I looked at him, calm. "I didn't take it from you," I said softly. "You gave it away, the day you pushed me out that door." He fell to his knees then, his head in his hands. His cries filled the room, the same room where I once begged for mercy and received none. I watched him without a word. The same pain that once tore through my heart was now crawling through his. But I didn't smile. I didn't feel victory. only a strange, heavy stillness. The kind that comes when justice finally arrives, not as fire, but as quiet truth. He begged. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't mean it. He said he was young, foolish, poisoned by pride and greed. His words came like rain, but they didn't wash anything away. They only made the silence heavier. I stood there, remembering every night I had spent hungry, every morning I had woken up on the streets, every time I had whispered my wife's name to the cold air. His apologies couldn't erase those years. Nothing could. I walked to the window and looked outside. The street was empty, the air still. The same world that had ignored me now seemed to watch in silence. I spoke quietly, almost to myself. You threw me out once. Tonight I'm walking out again. But this time, I'm not leaving broken. You are. He lifted his head, tears streaming down his face, and whispered, "Please, Dad. Don't go. I'll change. I swear I'll change." His words hit the air like weak wind. Too late. Change is not something you beg for when the world collapses. It's something you build before it's gone. I turned to him one last time. For a moment, I didn't see the man who betrayed me. I saw the boy who once held my hand, the child who once called me hero. That memory hurt more than anything. I wanted to reach out, to wipe his tears, to tell him it would be okay. But I didn't. Because it wouldn't be okay. Not now. Not ever. Some wounds don't heal. Some lessons must be learned in pain. As I walked to the door, he crawled after me, clutching my leg, crying like a child. His grip was weak, his body shaking. "Please don't leave me," he whispered. I looked down at him and said quietly, "You left me a long time ago." Then I pulled my leg free. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Clean, light, free. The night sky stretched above me, the stars faint but steady. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel the weight of pain. I felt peace. Behind me, I could still hear him sobbing, calling out my name, but his voice grew smaller with every step I took. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had already said goodbye 10 years ago. This was just the echo. As I reached the gate, I paused and turned my eyes to the house one last time. The same walls that had once witnessed my humiliation now stood as silent witnesses of justice. The lights inside flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw my wife's face in the window, calm, gentle, proud. I whispered, "It's done." Then I walked away into the quiet night. The road ahead was empty, but it felt like home. As I walked away from that house for the second time, the cold air bit at my face, but this time it didn't hurt. 10 years ago, I left with nothing. Not a coin, not a roof, not a name. This time, I left with peace. Behind me, I could still hear his voice echoing faintly, calling me Dad, again and again, as if that word could erase a decade of cruelty. But words are easy. Change is hard. I didn't turn back. I had turned back once before, hoping for love, and it had destroyed me. I had learned my lesson. This time, I walked straight ahead, my steps steady, my heart finally quiet. As I moved farther down the road, I thought of all the nights I had dreamed of this moment. Not revenge, not payback, but balance. Life has a strange way of balancing itself. It doesn't need your anger or your hate. It just waits for the right moment. My son had thrown me out into the cold, and life had thrown him into a colder place. The emptiness of regret. He had built his life on greed, and greed had eaten it whole. I didn't need to lift a finger. Time had done all the work. I reached the small crossroad where I had once sat as a homeless man years ago, staring at the lights of my old house. Back then, I thought my life was over. Tonight, I stood in the same spot, older, wiser, alive, and free. I realized something then. Justice doesn't always come as punishment. Sometimes justice is just the truth finally being seen. My son had finally seen it, the cost of what he did, and that was enough. I walked toward the small truck waiting by the road. The driver nodded at me, He was from the charity I had given the house to. We were taking the first batch of supplies for the elders who would move in soon. Blankets, food, medicine, small things, but they meant everything to people who had nothing. The thought filled me with warmth. The house that once made me cry would now bring peace to others. That, to me, was real justice. To take pain and turn it into something kind. To take betrayal and make it serve compassion. As we drove, I looked out the window at the city lights. Every shadow, every building seemed to whisper my story, of loss, of endurance, of return. I had spent years thinking that forgiveness meant weakness. I had been wrong. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone go free. It's about freeing yourself. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't love him the same either. What I felt now was beyond all that. It was acceptance. The next morning, I stood in front of the old house again, not as a father, not as a beggar, but as a man who had turned his suffering into something good. The charity workers were already there, cleaning, repairing, preparing for the new residents. One of them, a young man, asked me, "Sir, was this your house?" I smiled and said, "It used to be." He looked at me with respect, not pity, and said, "It's going to help a lot of people." I nodded. That was all I needed to hear. Later that day, I saw my son again, standing at the gate, watching quietly as they painted over the old nameplate. His face was pale, his eyes red, his hands shaking. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. I didn't speak to him. There were no more words left between us. He called out, "Dad, please." I didn't stop walking. I didn't hate him, but I didn't pity him either. He had made his choices. Now, he had to live with them. 10 years ago, I walked away with nothing. This time, I walked away with everything that mattered. Dignity, peace, and the strength of a man who survived betrayal. As I reached the end of the street, I turned back one last time. The house was glowing softly under the morning sun, the new workers moving in, the gate open wide. It no longer belonged to him or to me. It belonged to those who needed it most, men like me who had been forgotten, broken, and left to die. The same walls that had once echoed with cruelty would now echo with laughter and life. That was justice. Quiet, simple, complete. I walked down the road slowly, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. I had carried that burden for too long. I thought of my wife, her gentle smile, her voice telling me to keep faith. "You did it," I whispered. "You kept your promise. You took care of him, just not in the way you once thought." Behind me, I heard the sound of my son calling my name one last time, but I didn't look back. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed forever. I had already given him more than enough. Life, love, forgiveness. The rest was his to face. I walked until his voice faded, replaced by the sound of birds, the whisper of wind, the quiet hum of a world that finally made sense. 10 years ago, I was thrown out with nothing. Now, I walked away with peace so deep it felt like the first breath after drowning. My son was on his knees. I was finally standing tall, and that was justice.